All right, I'd like to welcome everybody. Thanks for coming to the first Journal Club of 2024. Tonight, Bernie Taylor is going to talk to us about his paper, Lunar Timekeeping in the Upper Paleolithic Cave Art, published in 2021 in Crypt Historia. And I really liked what I read, and I will turn it over to Bernie at this point.
Well, thank you. Lunar timekeeping in Upper Paleolithic cave art. Thousands of sequential marks were painted and engraved on portable objects and cave walls during the Upper Paleolithic. What were the intentions of these artists? Could these marks have projected their perceptions of time and space? Are these marks at the root of archaeoastronomy? My name is Bernie Taylor, and my research explores a deep root to mankind's creative capacity by looking at how hunter-gatherers and ancient peoples views their cosmoscape through the study of Upper Paleolithic cave art. And this is sort of my webpage. The source documents for most of this presentation are detailed in my prehistory paper for 2021, Lunar Timekeeping Upper Paleolithic Cave Art. My published books and papers on this subject go back to 2004. That was a long time ago. But this is sort of my journey, how I ended up into archaeoastronomy. It did not start with the stars. Okay. By the Upper Paleolithic, we generally refer to a time period between 50,000 to 10,000 years ago. In the Upper Paleolithic, there were cultures, such as the Magdalene in Europe, which lasted from 17 to 12,000 years ago, and was the period these images were made. These marks under question are depicted with straight lines, rectangular designs, strings of dots, and other shapes. Many hypotheses have emerged to describe these marks, including signs and symbols, hunting magic and tallies, fertility initiation rites, art for art's sake, altered states of consciousness, mathematical sets designating time, as well as constellations. Hunting can be ruled out. The most commonly depicted animals did not prominently figure into the Upper Paleolithic diets based on the bones found in their garbage heaps. There's also this Lascaux Hole Bulls interpretation as promoted by the BBC that we can discuss later in this presentation. The mathematical sets designating time hypothesis was initially forwarded by the American science writer Alexander Marshack, who is no stranger to this group. The Russians have their own hero in this narrative, and I was able to come up with, not read, but look from the Russian's book, see the notes, the footnotes and the bibliography, and Marshack is dated before his, and that was during the Cold War, and who was the first to space and all that sort of stuff. Marshack's major work in this area is The Roots of Civilization, which I'm sure is behind Chris somewhere. As printed in 1972, Marshack entered this field as a science writer on a book contract involving NASA to chronicle, in the words of the author, how man reached that point in science and civilization to make it possible to plan a manned landing on the moon. So it wasn't about archaeoastronomy. Compiling a narrative of development in space sciences and engineering technologies came easy to Marshack. That's what he usually wrote about. Yet the beginning of the story as to how we first came to empirically connect with the moon was more difficult. Marshack became concerned with what he called the suddenlies of important knowledge, astronomical knowledge, emerging on different continents in the ancient world that more reasonably should have had natural progressions from much earlier developments. Marshack came to believe that some of the more basic astronomical timekeeping knowledge was established deep in prehistory and then later inherited by civilizations in the ancient world after continued use. This pictured Salutrian culture baton with Marshack, which Marshack proposed a lunar count, helped him to establish this body of evidence. The details of Marshack's work are intriguing, and everyone in fields related to prehistoric time factoring have been influenced by him, even the Russian. Marshack proved without a doubt that Ice Age man could count and had a sense of mathematical sets. In a train of thought that may have been long ahead of his time, Marshack also forwarded the notion that we are today more technologically advanced than Ice Age people, but not smarter. And that's a shout out to the psychologists in the audience. Marshack's work has remained a controversial read. Here's Wikipedia, which may partly be due to his never answering the question of what might have been the practical applications of the mathematical keeping sets in relation to the actual animals depicted on the portable objects and cave walls. In other words, Marshack never established a measurable motive for the making of lunar marks in Upper Paleolithic imagery. The dissenting opinions were much more firmly entrenched. Then again, Marshack had most recently been researching man's journey to the moon for NASA, and not concerned with the life history strategies of sometimes long ago extinct animals on planet Earth. Nevertheless, we may today take steps in this exploration to determine the validity of Marshack's fundamental hypothesis, which could also answer the question of whether the Paleolithic mind is still our own. My work on this enigma started in 2002 while studying how migratory animals in nature time their life history events. I call this phenomena biological time. This path of travel ultimately led me to examine hunter-gatherer and pastoral calendars, then later to Upper Paleolithic cave images in an attempt to answer some of the same questions Marshack had proposed. This behavior applies to Atlantic salmon. Actually, we're going to miss the slide. Actually, I have to go back here, so I have a note session. So what we're looking at here is a fish monitoring station that counted the steelhead, which is an anadromous rainbow trout, sort of like a migrating salmon, going upstream. And what we can see is around the full moon periods, you have the lowest amount of counts of the salmon, or these winter steelhead. And so they have an up and down sort of motion. And this was just 1 year, but it's really just every year has the same thing. This behavior that we see in these wild steelhead trout, as well as salmons on the Pacific, we can find in Stonehenge, the Hampshire Avon near Stonehenge as well. Years ago, I visited Stonehenge and walked down to the Hampshire Avon, and there was a fisherman down in the river fishing for Atlantic salmon. He had no success, but what he was looking, people in the distant time would have known the same concept of the moon, the dark of the moon and the light of the moon influenced the migration of the salmon. Now, this concept is not just for the immigration of the salmon, but also for the spawning of the salmon. And I worked with Oregon Fish and Wildlife, and they loaned me their data. And we went back for many years, and we could see that the peak of the spawning of this salmon in this creek was around the full moon every year. And they went out every week, like on a Monday or a Tuesday. They didn't go out around the full moon or the new moon. Had they gone out on the new moon and full moon, the line would have been straight up for the peak of the salmon counts. This migration strategy is for outmigrate. The same goes with coho. These are coho as well. And these are the ones going outwards to the ocean. And we can see around the full moon, again, we have this lower count of the salmon, and during the dark of the moon, you have greater counts. So what's happening is around the full moon, the salmon and the steelhead, they slow down, they huddle together, they spawn. And during the dark of the moon, they move, they migrate. Now, this is not just a salmon thing. This is, I would suggest, is across the biological spectrum. And this was work done by Norm Anderson at Oregon State. I'm in Oregon, the United States. And Norm Anderson took his team out and they did invertebrate counts in a river, on a stream. It might have been coho, the same river that we just saw in the previous for the coho, because that was near by where the university is. They found around the full moon, there's very little migration of invertebrates in the river, but around the dark of the moon, it's highly pronounced. And this phenomenon is not just for invertebrates in rivers, but for zooplankton in lakes. They go up and down. So this is the basic like biology thing across the spectrum, and it counts for bees, honeybees as well. And during the light of the moon, there's more, or waning gibbous, there's more activity than there is around the dark of the moon. And this was in India, so that your data, if you did the same data here in the United States, it would be different, because in India, where that was done, they have warmer nights than we have here, and these are my family honeybees, Helen and I, and I've gone out there in the summertime, but it's just been too cool for the bees to have that behavior. But if this was a case of if insects are doing this across the biological spectrum, then insect spectrum, you potentially could influence the the pollination of plants. When I started this research 2 decades ago, this lunar time perspective was definitely on the cutting edge. Marshack would not have known anything about this in his time. But there are now identified examples of lunar light behavior represented across the animal kingdom, and discussion is mainstream. This was a downstream juvenile trapping station that I was involved with in Oregon. Okay. So did anybody know about this sort of stuff before our time, before I thought I was famous for, discovering it? Well, Native Americans knew it. And these are Native First Nation peoples, such as the Thompson India of British Columbia, held this biological information in their lunar calendars, as highlighted in red for salmon migrating upstream, the moon of the first sockeye salmon and the moon of the silver salmon. In the natural world, there are really no salmon moons. Rather, each lunation has multiple biological events, such as we found for the migrating and spawning salmon. These nuances are more fully expressed on other indigenous calendars and would have been in Thompson Indian practice. This Thompson Indian calendar is expressing biological events of those lunations that are most significant to them. Okay. One can find, very important for this group, one can find the source publications for this Thompson lunar calendar and others on both sides of the Pacific, as well as astronomical traditions and reports on the American Museum of Natural History Digital Library. That is a very important resource. Okay. This mature kiped Atlantic salmon near to the shores of the Vizir River, which runs along the Lascaux Cave in France, is engraved with 13 marks that may indicate the full moon spawning period, which we previously observed for the Coho salmon. Common worldwide into. Do I have feedback?
Yeah, Janice, could you put yourself on mute, please? I think we're getting feedback from that.
Me?
Janice.
Oh, Janice. Okay. Oh. Okay. A common worldwide and intuitive method of lunar counting is 13 from the first crescent moon to the first full moon, which these marks may be representing. On the Thompson Indian lunar calendar, we may also find the major life history events of deer, such as when they rut, shed their antlers, and drop their young. And the moon of the deer rut resets their calendar, and everything falls in line after that. One Thompson band reset the lunar calendar, as I said, by the rutting of the black-tailed deer. Other bands reset their lunar calendars by the rutting of mountain goats, which are ibex, as well as the rutting of bighorn sheep, and when groundhogs go to their den. The Thompson's observation of lunar influenced behavior for bighorn sheep can be supported in this Nevada study published with the U.S. Geological Survey. The research group found these animals to have lunar migration patterns, whereby the most evening movement occurred when the moon was brightest. The light and dark cycles of the moon synchronized animal behavior for their life history events. And this was a USGS study, so this is government official. The approaches of the Thompson bands to resetting the lunar calendar to biological events of animals resolves a fundamental problem with solar calendars. The 29.5 cycle of light and dark nights doesn't divide evenly into the year, pushing the calendar back 11 days each year. What other animals can't keep pushing their biological activity back 11 days each year, as they would be out of season for their events. Instead, they respond to solar and lunar light dark cues that shift these events back and forth from one year to the next in seasonal windows of time. Migrating salmon, waterfowl, and other animals are never early or late for a meal migration or reproductive events. They're on their own time, their biological time. And I think that Chris had a, for the Inuit in the previous month's presentation, that it had the lesser snow geese. And I had done work on the lesser snow geese. In fact, it is biologically cued. The movement back and forth for the birthing and hatching of animals exposes them to different environmental conditions. Early in the year, it may be too cold, or the heat of summer too late to get going with the herd. Life history strategy events in the solar years partly determine different rates of juvenile survival and ultimately adult abundance. A solar lunar calendar to predict the biological shifts in advance could be pivotal in resource management. This is what I was working on. It was not archaeoastronomy. I was working on an E equals MC square like universal formula of field biology, which ultimately led me to lunar calendars among ancient indigenous peoples, as well as Ice Age art. I was never able to come up with a predictable formula that spanned years, but did learn how hunter-gatherers could predict events of animals months, or rather a few lunation, into the future. I would have been in Stockholm and not on this in this wonderful session if I had been proven correct. Or maybe I would have gone to Stockholm and come back here. I also learned that cycles of animal abundance can be patterned by the sun and moon. In this graph, we're looking at the half and full moon metonic cycles of returning Atlantic salmon on the Restigouche in New Brunswick, which I also visit. The lines are smoothed out using a 3-year moving average. The graph was drawn by the study's researchers. I added the full moon locations. This graph indicates that the first full moon after the winter solstice could have been used to predict the low years or upward and downward slopes. Indigenous peoples who charted the paths of the sun and moon could have observed these patterns and used this information to prepare for bountiful and lean years. Note that Atlantic salmon can return after 1, 2, or 3, or up to 5 sea winters, with some returning to the salt multiple times. This graph is not made up of 1-year class of fish. And so was Stonehenge utilized to track such cycles of Atlantic salmon? I don't know. The cycles of Atlantic salmon would have been easily observable by the people of Stonehenge, just as they are in people in New Brunswick, Canada. I should know that the concept of cycles in animals and wildlife date to before my time. This book was published in 1963. The sole linear biological success approach, as I proposed it, was unique. The people who wrote, Lloyd Keith, who wrote this book, he actually had heard of the concept that people said, well, it could be lunar timed. But at that time, when this book was written and before that, lunar timing in animals was not a concept in the biological wildlife circles. So they couldn't have, he might have approached it differently, these 10-year cycles, if he had known about the biological concepts that, of course, the Native Americans had, that I did not discover. We can still see the future of events through the biological time and lunar synchronized behavior with animals such as these stags and the Lascaux cave. They're likely red deer crossing a river. We can see their heads bobbing back and forth in the uneven current. The lower stag looks as though he is plunging into a pool. The fourth stag has 7 spheres floating between his antlers. Counting 7 lunation from the vernal equinox, this would be approximately our month of October, and when stags would have migrated to breed. This is also the approximate time start of the lunar calendar for the Thompson band, which cued off the black-tailed deer rut. A test of this lunation after the vernal equinox start period can be determined by whether the practice is found on other panels in the Lascaux cave complex. We return to this yearly start of the year question shortly. The observed and recording rutting of the black-tailed deer within 1 lunation among the Thompson may also be expressed with this black stag at the Lascaux, with 13 box leading to a first crescent moon from a first crescent moon to the first full moon at the box. We can see the resemblance between the Lascaux black stag and this rutting red deer stag. Red deer would be equivalent of an elk here in North America. Note the large antler sets, arched necks, and hot breaths calling in the females during a cool autumn morning. Ice Age visitors at Lascaux may have been able to maybe have used the vocalization of the rutting stag as a descriptive name. They may have also ceremonially called back to the stag. One would be arrested today. To see this, the cave was closed in 1963, before my time. On the viewer's bottom right, we can again find a count of 13 in a box with its major stag in rutting condition at Lascaux. Above the stag is a hunter drawing his bow on an elk with 13 marks on his back, as depicted in rock art in the Columbia River Basin near to where I live in Oregon. This Griffith Observer issue goes back to 2007, was one of my earlier published works on the subject. The Griffith Observer is published by the Griffith Observatory. You may have had Ed Krupp on here in the past. He's a monumental figure in archaeoastronomy. Reading from the viewer's left to right, we may find another count of 13 leading to a box formed by the forelegs of this pregnant mare at Lascaux. But in this case, the dots continue on, suggesting that the depicted event for this pregnant mare occurs later in the lunar cycle during the darker nights. This nomenclature could indicate an important event, such as foaling, that is the dropping of the young. One field biology reference for lunar time birthing of ungulates comes from the Canadian zoologist Anthony Sinclair, who back calculated the dropping of blue wildebeest calves in the Serengeti to show that the start of the rut was at full moon, and the first dropping of the calves was at new moon. So this ties back to the Thompson Indian calendar. Blue wildebeest have a 257-day or 8.7 lunation gestation period to make this astrobiologically possible. Sinclair proposed that the dark nights gave calves a better chance at avoiding carnivores. In support of Sinclair's hypothesis, much years later, this work showed that lunar light dark predation has been observed in studies of African lions. This picture data from National Geographic suggests that African lions are cued to hunt during evenings when the moon is dark, which results in greater encounters with humans. Under the dark night periods, the lions can better get the jump on their prey that would otherwise see them from a distance. The lions become active to hunt as cued by the light-dark rhythms in the days and nights, such that we previously observed with the light history strategy of the salmonids. With respect to the Sinclair study of blue wildebeest, newly dropped calves, which can't run away from the carnivores under either light or dark night conditions, have a greater chance of survival during the darkest nights. The calves can better move with the herd a few weeks later under the light of the moon, such as we see here. Even then, one can sense the calf's vulnerability. This lunar-timed life history strategy can be observed for reindeer as highlighted in red on the calendar of the Chukchi herders. These Siberian people live by the rhythms of the moon, or rather live with the rhythms of the reindeer, which are biologically cued by light-dark signals from both the sun and the moon. One could suggest that they are not lunar or solar calendars, but rather living calendars that one needs to persevere in extreme conditions. As a side note, their name is derived from the word Chukchi, word Chukchu, which means rich in reindeer. Now this is we're gonna, one or two slides that the women tend to get, or already even knew before I said it, presented. While humans can live in the moons of reindeer, we have our own rhythms of biological behavior. The human female's menstrual cycle is on average 28 days. There's a variability, and the average for some women could be a day or two more or less. Women are not cued by any phase of the moon. However, women who live in close quarters, such as dorms, prisons, and convents, can synchronize in both start of menses and during the common lunar phase. In 1998, there was a nature study where it was found that the pheromones released by skin glands from one woman was exposed to other woman who then synchronized her menstrual cycles. This is referred to as the McClintock effect, after the primary investigator who had been working on this approach for decades. Menstrual cycles are unique among animals. We can count primates, bats, and the elephant shrew. That's all in the many millions of animal species on our planet. Among the great apes, the gorilla, orangutan, bonobo, and us have a rhythm that is close to light-dark cycles of the moon. The chimpanzee is at 37 days. Our natural synchronization with the phase of the moon is probably what enabled us to first consciously tell time, as opposed to react to it as the salmon and the deer and the other animals do. Why the gorilla, orangutan, or bonobo today don't appear to have the same realization is unclear. Okay. Monkeys do respond to lunar cues in their natural environment, and they consciously recognize when the lights are on or off. That's already established. The question is whether or not the other great apes with lunar time menstrual cycles can consciously predict phases of the moon or lunation. They are then us. They can tell time. Maybe these great apes in a natural environment have had this realization. It is us who have not sought to recognize the behavior. Perhaps an ability such as language or another benefit was needed for them to mentally reinforce and thus consciously set the clock, such as foraging with lunar-timed ocean tides. This lunar synchronization among humans was not always possible, as our moon is slowly moving away from Earth. Had Homo sapiens not evolved with a menstrual cycle that is in sync with the moon in an astronomical window that made it possible, we may never have emerged as conscious timekeepers, as we are, and not been able to schedule this presentation today. If this lunar evolutionary hypothesis is correct, then conscious timekeeping may not be able to evolve on other planets without the same conditions. SETI has never invited me to speak. While the horse deer and reindeer don't have menstrual cycles, they do have light and dark seasonal and lunar entrainment of biological events. This entrainment may help us to identify a lunar calendar on the grid above this late-stage pregnant mare at the Lascaux Axial Gallery. First, we need to to review the life history strategy of horses. Similar to the blue wildebeest, for mares, there's an offset in the gestation period to about a half lunation. Thus, if a horse breeds at the full moon, she would drop her foal in the dark of the moon after 336 day or 11.4 lunation gestation. Among captive mares, studies show that foaling occurs primarily at night, with the maximal incidence between 10 and 11 p.m. This biological time is an evolutionary life history strategy to protect the newly dropped foal against predators and is carried on even when those dangers are not present. I have a friend with more than 300 llamas. That's a lot of llamas that he breeds as show animals. The hobby started with a few llamas for pack animals, and llamas breed. Um, and then, so what he used to do, he had ranch hand, and they used to go out. They should wait for the llamas to drop their young, and it was typically at night, so they had to wait around the middle of the night, 11, 12 at night. And then one day, by accident, one of his ranch hands left the lights on in the stalls, and from that point on, the llamas would drop their young at any time of the day or night. And so from that time on, they kept the lights on, so they didn't have to wait up in the middle of the night for the llamas to drop their young. Of course, people knew about this before my friend had 300 llamas and was getting up every night. The Lascaux cave artists could have started their yearly calendar with the dropping of the foal as the first lunation or event of another time, resetting animal, or from the first lunation after the vernal equinox. In either of these cases, the dot in the center of the first box at 1Y would indicate the dropping of the foal, and I added that 1Y at the top. This biological event is after the vernal equinox lunation beginning time and consistent with the proposed lunar count starting for the 5 stags crossing the river as previously described. The reading direction for this grid is from the view is right to left as the moon rises in the spring to summer sky. The syntax was in the details, just as it is today with written language. The recognition of foal dropping is found among the Akut in Siberia. In their lunar calendar, the foal he catches is approximately our month of April. Some Thompson Indian bands in British Columbia reset their lunar calendar with the rutting of mountain goats, which may substitute with these alpine ibex. Here we have a male ibex in black and a pregnant female in light brown with a center marked grid pattern connected to her muzzle. Alpine ibex drop their kids in May after 167 day or 5.6 lunation gestation period and offset, a lunar offset. Following the syntax of the pregnant mare and a lunation after the vernal equinox start of the calendar, the dropping of the kids would have been marked as 2Y, which is 5.6 lunation from when they currently breed. Pictured here on the axial gallery is this burthen oryx that is often referred to as a leaping cow. It's not a leaping cow. Note how the rear legs of both bovines are positioned to be pushing out the calf. The Lascaux artist depicts some inner organs of this oryx, such as the rumen in red and what appears to be the elongated white calf sac with her rear area. These Lascaux images of pregnant and birthing animals do not appear to be indicative of hunting magic or talies, fertility and initiation rites, altered states of consciousness, or art for art's sake. They have seasonal and biological intent. If you ask farmers about such birthing of horses, goats, and cows, they will share that's as real as life gets. Female oryx are considered to have been autumn breeders and would have calved in June and July after a 285 day or 9.6 lunation gestation period, as is common for domesticated cattle today. Following the syntax of the pregnant mare and pregnant ibex and a lunation after the vernal equinox star of the calendar, the drop of the calves would have been marked at 3-4Y, which is 285 days or 9.6 lunation from when they bred. The grid connected to the muzzle of this birthing oryx, and those grids with the pregnant mare and pregnant ibex support Marshack's fundamental hypothesis of lunar time factor knowledge among Ice Age artists. We have taken a few steps further through this presentation by connecting the grids with the life history strategy of the depicted animals and their biological time. As promised, we can now look at the Lascaux whole bulls oryx interpretation that I'm sure everybody has seen before, everybody in the archaeoastronomy space as well. I have a few concerns with this. Okay. The first First is that there are only 3 stars in the belt of Orion. The original Lascaux image has 4. The edited and highly publicized Lascaux image adds dots that aren't there. And why are only 6 stars in the Pleiades? Ancient sky watchers around the world counted 7. The 7th is Pleione, an eruptive variable star which flings away an outer layer of gas into an expanding bubble, thus reducing its brightness. The Ice Age artists may have seen more stars in their dark night skies, but not likely less. The bigger issue with this Orion interpretation is that people are cropping out 2 of the oryx in the scene. The 4 dots are actually on the lower oryx. My interpretation of the whole bull's oryx with the full 4 dots at her back, legs splayed forward and lower rear, is the same as the previous axial gallery oryx. She is birthing in the 4th lunation after the vernal equinox. The 6 dots above the bull behind her are depicting the 6th lunation after the vernal equinox when he is starting to breed. The relative position of the male and female oryx gives the perception that he is moving in towards her. This Lascaux work was made famous by my friend Chantal, who proposed that many of the animals in the Hall of the Bulls represented constellations. That was a long time ago. Chantal's stellar work was featured in a documentary video titled Prehistoric Astronomers that you may find on YouTube and other platforms in multiple languages. Chantal's documentary inspired me to return to Upper Paleolithic astronomy after putting the lunar timing research and writing on the shelf for more than 10 years. Chantal read my 2004 book, Biological Time, and then authored a number of excellent books on lunar timing and Ice Age art. She today conducts more advanced lunar archaeoastronomy research than I do. There may still be another step in the study of these images, if you will indulge me for a few more minutes. When discussing them with an astronomer friend, he suggests that the lines look like fingers, and they do. Also reminding me that sky watchers use their hands for time reckoning. There appears to be a syntax in these grids, and the marks designated by the boxes are short or long and describe if the fingers are up or down and bent. If these elongated lines represent fingers, then the grids separating them may also hold the syntax for a sign language. An application of the syntax to the right hand is pictured. The fingers are completely down when and where the juveniles drop their young. The artist did not utilize all the fingers in these signs. The extra fingers not used are marked by these red X's. The syntax embodies descriptions of the female's physical features with a focus on the ears for the horse, antlers for the ibex, and horns for the oryx. Hand gestures that depict animals is not a new idea. I am a novice scuba diver and can sign a dozen or more coral reef animals. Plus that's a shark. These Bushman signs are characterized by the position of their heads and ears. To step back a little, chimpanzee in their natural environments have shown to have 66 gestures. A chimpanzee in captivity named Washoe, who's very famous, learned approximately 350 words of American Sign Language. Ice Age artists having sign language is not a stretch. Pictured here are figurative hand signs for the horse as found in the Western North American Indian ethnographical record. Note that they are one-handed, two-handed, and different orientations of their hands. One would similarly expect to see figurative differences between Upper Paleolithic cultures and across caves that project the styles of each artist or clan. There are likely different signs representing significant biological events for animals, such as those we found listed on the lunar calendar of the Thompson Indians. This presentation has taken the idea a step further, suggesting that some hand gestures are time factored as well. The Lascaux artists could have signed "Let's meet in the moon" when the ibex kids drop, which would have been in the 2nd lunation after the vernal equinox in the dark of the moon at approximately our month of May, as pictured in both of these images. The Lascaux artists couldn't sign "Let's meet in May" as our months weren't invented until the Romans. We were fortunate to have at Lascaux 3 animals with grids in one gallery, and others with lunar time factored marks in nearby chambers to work out these schemes. The sign approach may solve a peculiarity in the Lascaux cave. Among the more than 600 wall paintings, there are no identifiable hand stencils, while other Magdalenian and earlier culture caves have many stenciled hands in various configurations, such as these on the panel of the hands at the El Castillo cave in Spain. I've been to this cave and I've seen this panel. Through the study of Lascaux images, hunter-gatherer calendars, and the biological time of these depicted animals, we may learn that the Ice Age artist portrayals are scientific nomenclature. We have also found syntax held in the images that are important elements for inscriptions. Marshack's notion that we are today more technologically advanced than Ice Age people, but not smarter, was more correct than he had imagined. Here's a little psychology, a little more psychology. This lunar time factor hypothesis may also help us to find a broader understanding of the Paleolithic mind. Remember the scene of 5 stags swimming across a river as depicted on this Lascaux panel. The stag scene is presumably in the Vizier River outside the Lascaux cave. The Ice Age artist transferred a scene from the terrestrial realm into the cave. That same scene is also connected to the sky world through the influence of the moon. The act of making art on the cave walls bridges these 3 realms in his cosmoscape, whereby the artist is projecting a perception of time and space. And the world tree, common psychology. We may express this concept of 3 interconnecting transcendental cosmoscape realms through a tree, often referred to religious historians and mythologists as the world tree. This motif found among indigenous peoples around the world may have originated in the Upper Paleolithic Africa or Europe. I've dated this theme to about 34,000 years ago among the Organatians on the Iberian Peninsula. The Paleolithic mind is still our own. As promised, we now travel to the Upper Sonoran Desert, somewhere outside of Sedona, Arizona, to see if we can apply some of these principles. We're at Red Tank Draw. Okay. We can see layered animals in this section of the panel. There's a fully antlered mature male and a female deer in the rut. It's marked by the green. A pair of coyotes breeding. Oh, we'll go back the antlered deer would be November into December. And then mid-January to mid-March, we have a pair of breeding coyotes. Whenever you see breeding animals, that's, it's pointing to a time and space. We can see spirals in the same clockwise direction that may indicate spring. The concentric circles and crossed lines are unclear to this researcher, but I'm sure people here have ideas. There are 2 separated pronghorn antelopes indicating the spring when the larger adult male lives a solitary life. 2 regal horned lizards emerge from hibernation in late March to mid-April. The female is the largest of the breeding pair. The female pronghorn antelope is very pregnant, soon to drop her fawn. This is probably there is probably more going on this panel. To the viewers left, there's more cervids. The natural horizon lines may also be time factor designating seasonality. The consecutive order of the red tank draw animals suggests a lunar calendar, such as we observed with the Thompson Indians of British Columbia and in Lascaux. My daughter and I visited this site back in 2009 while on a pink Jeep tour out of Sedona. You can see why she chose the pink Jeep tour. My daughter is in graduate school now, working on something other than rock art. More in my work can be found these sites. You can follow me, you can make marks. I'm always open to cooperate on projects and virtually present my research to community and academic audiences. And the prehistoric paper was published in 2021, but I'd actually left that work back, really 2006, and I stopped doing it. And I was asked to write the paper to kind of introduce it to a newer audience. But I had gone off in a completely different world of archaeoastronomy in terms of constellations over those years, starting again in about 2015, 2014. So what I do now is completely different than I did today, as I presented today. But I think there's an audience, who didn't read my stuff back in 2004, 5, 6. And so that's why I reached out to Chris and said, hey, this might be something of interest to the group. But I'm always open to do presentations on my work. It came out starting 2017 and continued to the present. And I'm going to stop. Actually, so does anybody have any questions? Well, I have my screen up.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, feel free to just unmute. Bernie, I might ask you to just maybe run over again um, the concept of the geometric calendar
Sure.
on these panels,
Absolutely.
and their use and potential reuse. I imagine was probably important as well.
Okay. So the geometric patterns, it's actually these type of patterns are fairly rare in upper Paleolithic cave art, whereas most caves have a lot of hands, and Lascaux does not have any identified hands. So they so my proposal is that they substitute up in this case they separate out the geometric patterns
Okay.
for the um for the hands. There's other something interesting about Lascaux is it has a lot of horses. I mean, like a lot of horses. And someone did a paper a few years ago, and I saw the presentation. I can't cite it, and they said that there was the first someone went in and just created all the horses, and then they came in and followed with these other animals. And I would suggest that the horse is like the red deer of the black-tailed deer of the Thompson Indians. It was the first animal to have its biological event in the spring. Okay. Maybe a bird migrated in, I don't know, but clearly that would be the horse would have been similar, and that would have set off these other animals in motion. But they counted every animal. They just didn't like they didn't just start with the horse as many Native American Canadians did. They they continued to count every animal, and so I'm proposing that all these grids start. Actually, we'll just go back here. Go back. Go back. I go back to I say that they use as many grids or fingers, as you would say, as they need to complete the cycle. And the horse will drop its young based on the gestation period and will drop in this 1Y. And then they'll breed again in 2 and 3. And then they're done until the next cycle around. So that's how I explain that one. And then we have a gestation. We follow when this is dropping the young. They mate the ibex mate in the fall. Count the gestation months, and then it'll land here in the second lunation after the vernal equinox. And that's why they mark that one. And again, they only use 3 because there's nothing after that happens in that time period. Whereas if we go to this birth in aurochs, formerly the cow leaping, which the French and the don't really like my renaming these things, but it's not leaping, so but the muzzle of the aurochs touches the grids, and you can see the rumen in there, this red area. And I've dressed big game, so I've kind of seen this stuff before. I assume they've dressed big game too. But we can go through the cycle, and we have a 9.6 lunar gestation period, and so she'll drop her young in the so this would be like the first lunation after the vernal equinox. So we're talking April, May, June, July. So what's different is here. What different is not there. And so that's what I would suggest why she does it this way. Now, a friend of mine, when I was doing this, a long time ago, a friend said to me, well, it's kind of curious that you have all these animals that are dropping with their gestation period is tied to these offset lunations. And so I did a quick study, as best I could, and I came up with like 30 ungulates, around the world, and maybe 25 of them had these offsets. So this is part of the life history strategy of these animals that have these offset gestation periods relative to the light dark cycle of the moon, as they found with the Serengeti wildebeest, says that that the rut starts at the full moon when they're all grouped together in the same way as the salmon are all grouped together, but because they have an offset lunar gestation period, they will begin dropping their young at the dark of the moon. Now, dropping the young at the dark of the moon could be great in some years, but in some years it might be too early. Okay, it might be too early in the seasonal window for success. And so there's a magic window that's earlier or later with the moon shifting. And my hypothesis for the salmon to try to figure out these cycles was I was studying the question of the based on when the juveniles would go down to the ocean, they have delayed mortality. Could I tell as an adult? Could I predict that as an adult? And I wasn't able to do it. And I know why I wasn't able to do it. But it's possible that this same concept could happen with these large ungulates. And there are cycles of many other animals, typically 4-year cycles. And I looked at other animals such as the like lynxes, and lynxes have a common 4-year cycle. And I can tell you 3 years in a row whether they've had success. But in the 4th year, when they do the resetting, I can't tell which way it's going to go, whether it's going to be more or less. So once I know I've got the 4, I can easily tell you the 3. But that's no big trick because you don't know the 4th year in the cycle. Which way? Yeah.
Sorry, may I ask? I'm sorry. Sure. I'm missing something completely, and I agree. My name's Rick, by the way, and Bernie. Thank you very much. I love the article, and this is a great presentation. But I was in the same camp that Chris was. Going back to this grid, I don't get the grid and lunar cycles.
God. Okay, I'm sorry. That's my second. Okay.
One more time, please.
Sure. Actually, so they're starting with the vernal equinox. So go with the ibex. So
well, actually, go back to the other one just for a second.
Oh yeah, start with go to the horse. Okay. So this is a natural. This dot has been made onto this grid by the Ice Age artists, and so they're starting with the vernal equinox. Okay, and then they're the first dark of the moon. The first dark of the moon after.
What does Y mean?
Oh, the dropping. I'm sorry, I got it down here. Can you see these notes?
Yes, of course I can.
Okay, so the dropping of the young in the dark of the moon. So I just put Y. I added Y. I could have put anything.
So a Y means I'm dropping a calf.
Yes.
Okay.
In this case, a foal. Yes.
Why isn't that in your paper?
Oh, it's in there.
But
it's in the notes. It's in the notes.
Okay, maybe I didn't get it. So anyway,
Yeah.
So Y is a dropping of a calf.
The young.
Okay, now go on.
And then, so in this case, the second and third, he's interested in the drop in the young. But one could say in the second and third, they start breeding, but that's not what he's interested in.
So 2.
Second and third lunation after the vernal equinox.
So 2 is 29 and a half days after the dot.
2 would be, so this would be the dark of the moon, and then we're into full. This would be the full moon. They're using the boxes as full moons. I'm sorry, the full boxes are full moons, as we saw with the black stag, and let's go earlier on. You have 13 count to the box, and as we saw with the horse with the mare with all those boxes, she counts as 13. You have the box, and you count on to the dark of the moon. So they're using the box itself as the full moon. And then when they put a mark in the center of the box, they're marking as a new moon. And we have the same thing here. They're marking as the new moon.
Okay, so when I'm looking at this particular grid here, am I seeing a 3-month cycle?
You are seeing the answer is not a 3-month cycle, but you're seeing this would be the first lunation after the winter solstice. I'm sorry, after the vernal equinox. This would be the second lunation after the vernal equinox, and this would be the third lunation at the vernal equinox. But it's not a cycle because it's actually part of the year cycle of the ibex.
Okay, and what this then is marking not the gestation period,
but the dropping of the young.
But the period between when I drop a young and when I copulate a new young.
So that's how I explained it to explain the whole gestation period. But they didn't need to know that. They actually didn't need to know that. They knew that the full moon here for the horse, which is because it's not the horse here, the new moon here, the horse would have dropped her young, and then the next new moon, the alpine ibex would have dropped her young. So they're going from one lunation. They're going from one lunation to the next, but they're counting each lunation as a significant event for the animal, a biological event for the animal.
I love the relationship between lunations and counting and natural cycles and all of that stuff. But I still am not seeing what you're seeing in these very unnatural grid marking box things and in a lunar cycle. I'm just
okay. So explain again. So they're starting with the vernal equinox. We can say that, okay? And the first lunation after the vernal equinox in the dark of the moon will be the dropping of the young for the mare. Okay. And so they mark that in the center. They mark that in the center. The second lunation, so this is second lunation, they actually start breeding. They start breeding again. But the second lunation, in this case, we have the dropping of the young for the ibex.
Okay.
And so they're using one hand. They're literally using one hand. They don't use two hands because they use two hands. In the hand gestures, you're obviously using two hands. You can see them, but they're counting off with the hands. And so you could actually step away from this whole thing, and you can say this concept. You say, well, we start our count with the vernal equinox, and this is the first lunation after the vernal equinox. This is the second lunation after the vernal equinox. This is the third, and this is the fourth. So they didn't have months. And so the natural substitute for that is counting lunation from the vernal equinox. But what they're doing is they're counting it from they're counting the moon of this, the moon of that, the moon of the next one, the moon of the next one. Now, what we saw earlier with all these calendars with the Thompson and the Uruk is they're saying the significant event in that lunation they give, but they don't always give. Some of those could be full moon events, and some of those could be new moon events. And so they give this is the significant event for that, and they'll say, when the ibex dropped their young, we're going to meet again at this cliff to watch them do this sort of thing. And so they're counting off. Now this counting off concept is not a new idea. My suggestion, though, is they're not counting off the vernal equinox. That's how the math would easily work out. I think that the counting off, I think they're counting the horse, the mare is the obvious one, same as the rutting of the black-tailed deer for the Thomsonians, because they can actually see the same life history strategy. They can see the whole life history because it's almost a year. They couldn't do that for the ibex because the ibex, they weren't in this part of France up on the mountain when the ibex were mating. They were at a different place and time. So I would say they were doing the same thing as the black-tailed deer with the horse, and that's why the horse. Someone went in and made a whole bunch of horses in the Let's Go cave, and later they added all these other animals. So I think it would be easy to say, well, that's the first, that's the dark of the moon, the first lunation at the vernal equinox, but I don't think that's how they did it. Because I've looked at a lot of calendars, and most of them don't cue off the vernal equinox. Most of them cue off the arrival of an animal or following the gestation of an animal through the winter. And so when you see,
can I just offer 2 points real quick, or maybe just one at this point? I'd feel more comfortable if we use the term spring moon, maybe, than vernal equinox.
Oh, okay, spring moon. Okay, got it. Yeah.
Because
yes,
the one would have been very observable, and the other would have no concept of for thousands of years.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. So we could say the spring new moon. Yeah, I'm okay with that. Yeah.
Bernie, one more question, and then I'll get off the grid.
Sure.
But I think you explained in the paper, but maybe I now that I'm sort of hearing what's the difference between the well, go back, I guess, go to another grid here. So in this particular case, there's 6 squares. The ones on the bottom are shorter. The ones on the top,
yes,
3 on the top are larger. I think you explained it, but what's that mean, or why are there 6 here and that kind of stuff?
So this is what that goes into. Let's go back. Yes, absolutely. So I think it's a hand gesture, and so where are those slides? the hand gesture. By the way, it's not my idea. I mean, the fingers are not my idea. An astronomy friend, like a professional astronomer, I think they're dropping and lowering the fingers based on I think they're recreating the ears or the antlers, the head appendages for the animals, and so they drop. So this becomes a drop in the finger for the first lunation, for the spring new moon. Okay, and then this is the first spring moon. The second spring new moon is the dropping of the ibex, and the birth of the oryx, or the third and the fourth. We're into summer new moons. We're into third and fourth new moons after the spring. I think that's how they drop there. I think that they cleverly came up with a scheme to do this. And now the Native Americans in American Indian Sign Language, they didn't do that. They didn't count lunations like that, but they did it two different ways. They didn't have it before or after. They would say, let's meet in the new moon when this happens. That was their way of saying things. They didn't count five. They didn't say, let's meet in 5 new moons. They would say, let's meet in the new moon when this event happens. And then they would sign, a horse or something like that. Okay. So I think that the Lascaux artists, in this case, they were very clever that they put these together to make common sign languages. I don't believe, in fact, I know this would not go across every cave in every culture, because sign languages don't work that way.
And I think you mentioned that, I think, in the paper also, and then how many of these sort of these grid things or these little line boxes are there at Lascaux? Is it really just about 5 or 6 of them, or is it?
Yeah, there's 3 in this chamber, and then I would say this type. So these there's the single ones, as like we saw with the black stag, and we saw with the Lascaux stag, the one with, it was just I had an illustration. There's a few of those, and I think there's 2 or 3 more in another chamber, and it's another chamber yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And they're ibex.
And
I'm sorry, the oryx. They're oryx.
And every time,
and in that case, and what you have actually, the problem with that one is that you have multiple animals on top of each other.
Right.
And so one could actually start pulling out whatever they want to pull out.
Yeah, I guess I was going to add to that is and then there is only one kind of grid associated with one species of animal, right?
Oh, that part is correct. Yeah. So the oryx and the oryx in that space, and the space is a bunch of oryx, and there's 4. There's 4. Okay. There's not 3, and there's not.
Thank you. I mean, there's a lot of great thinking going in here, but.
Oh yeah, and actually, I started this not with the hand gestures, and I didn't start it with the. I started with the sort of the endocrinology, because you just can't throw out graphs and say this is when the salmon migrate the most or slow down and this sort of stuff. In the biological world, you have to have a smoking gun, because you don't really know what it is. And so I was looking at the endocrinology of how the melatonin was acting during these light dark periods, because then you could say this is why it is versus this is what it looks like. And this came much later, because I was not, but I was trying to figure out this. When did they start counting, and when they started counting, that would reset their calendar for the year. And the answer to that was, you can't find it in the moon, you can't find it in the stars, you can't find it in the sun, you can't find it in the moon. That I looked at many different cultures around the world, indigenous peoples, and they always had a first species, an indicator species that re-indexed their calendar. In the case of the Thompson Institute, we had the black-tailed deer. But you can go around the world, and it's Northwest here, we have many different indexing species. And I could tell you the cycles of the animals by looking at the indexing species, but I can't do it mathematically, on an Excel spreadsheet. Right. That was my quest. I failed.
I'm not suggesting any kind of correlation at all whatsoever. I just found it curious that a prevalent theory of the origin of the Maya ritual, well, the Mesoamerican ritual calendar, 268 calendar, is that it simulates the human gestation period. And that Paxton has argued that that ritual calendar, as opposed to the solar, was presided over by a lunar deity. So, like I said,
Interesting, yeah.
I'm not suggesting any connection at all. Just if I found that reflection curious.
Yeah, I would say that the female human was our first calendar, and that the female human, the menstrual cycle, the moon does not reach out to orchestrate the female's menstrual cycle, but rather it's a time and space that the woman's female menstrual cycle fell within our cycle, the cycle of the moon, and then then females learned how to tell time, and they become a natural clock, natural biological clock, and that's how we're the only species on this planet, as far as we know, that can actually tell time. Chimpanzee knows it had a bad day in the past, and it can hold grudges. We know that. Washoe hold lots of grudges, but the Washoe didn't know when that day was, or if it could happen again at a certain time and place. But we're the only species on this planet that can, as far as we know, can do that, because we can tell time. And the way we can do it is because we were the Great Almighty blessed us with the female's menstrual cycle, which is almost on cue, and is variable, flexible, to be with the cycle of the moon. And so it's so, the elephant shrew, you have like 5-day menstrual cycles or something, and the bats have maybe 10 days, and the chimpanzees at 36, 37. We are so unique in this respect. And I believe that people around the world knew this. The Maya probably, of course, they recognized this. And could they have constructed a calendar based on that remembrance? Of course they would have.
Mm-hmm.
It's basic human biology.
So I noticed that Constance has turned her mute off.
I just wanted to say that one of the things it seems you're proposing is that, given these biological factors that the Paleolithic people were immersed in, that they created a symbolic, I'm interested in the origin of symbolic, that they created a symbolic way of, leaving that for other people to read. And so that to me is very interesting, if true.
Yes, absolutely. It's fascinating. So we saw the El Castillo hand gestures that are kind of in purple, but that's actually just the lighting. That was the lighting. Those are about 38 to 40,000 years old. Whereas Lascaux here is about 17,000, 17 and 19. So the hand gestures came a long time before Lascaux. But what's unique about Lascaux is that they're all Magdalene, and they're a very short time period. And in this case, we have 3 animals with 3 different grids, and very distinct what their biological condition is in the same chamber. And so it helps us to work out the math in a consistent way, whereas you couldn't do that comparing 5 different caves where people are from different periods and different cultures. So I'm going to say and I talked about the Thompson Indians earlier. The Thompson Indians had 4 different ways of resetting their calendar. It always worked out the same way, whether it was the black-tailed deer, it was the marmots, all these different animals that they used to reset the calendar, but they all reset it. Those animals all had their events at the same time of year, and they counted from there. Or the marmots went into their den. So symbolic. So I thought, when I was doing this, what was most striking to me when I first worked on this was that the images especially the images with the red deer dropping into the pool of water, is that they found pareidolia of that river in the cave, because that in itself is not natural. I'm sorry, it's not man-made. So they saw those lines in the caves, which looks in fact like a river. And then they took an animal from outside the cave and then put it into the cave to make it look like it was going down the river. So people say, why don't Neanderthals have cave art? I would say, well, why the heck do we do that? Why did we take this image from outside the cave that we knew exactly what was going on, that we put it into the cave to connect these different realms, the underworld, the cave, the terrestrial plane, and the sky world? And so my work going on from that point was actually, I've done a lot of work on that concept. So Neanderthals could have done everything we're seeing today. There's no reason they couldn't do it. Because if someone has a little more, a little less Neanderthal DNA, can they, count more or less? Can they make more or less better or worse art? Of course not. And so it was so unique that we made this step, this spiritual step of connecting these three realms in the world tree, that we find mythology around the world, and for the psychology. It's a worldwide phenomenon that we have this motif. And it didn't start here at Lascaux. I can tell you that. And yeah. I can go back to 36,000 years ago in both in Africa and on the Iberian Peninsula with this same world tree sort of concept of the three realms. And I think that's I mean, it's the hand gestures are kind of cool, and people can learn a little about the gestation period of these animals, and you can look at in the Upper Sonoran Desert. You can see these animals, how they drop from the top to the bottom, and they have the different cycle. You're seeing different biological events. You see the deer, you see the coyotes, so forth. But from my perspective, is that what is so magical about this is the connection of the three realms. And by us connecting these three realms, we left the evidence of it, that the Neanderthals probably knew everything. I'm sure they knew it, but they didn't write it down. Therefore, we say, they're dumb Neanderthals or something. They couldn't write. They didn't have civilization because they didn't write down things.
They didn't have an emerging symbolic system. And what you're pointing to is the emerging symbolic system that not only is developed in the depiction of the animals, which is also symbolic, obviously, but something beyond just the animal depictions.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
So was that psychology enough for you today? Did you get your?
Yes, I got my fill. I'm going to have to read your paper, which I have to admit I hadn't done yet.
Actually, for if you go to my academia page, I do a lot more on the psychology and on the mythology. That paper doesn't have the stuff. Yeah.
Well, I noticed you're on ResearchGate. Do you have those on ResearchGate?
Yes. A few days ago, I just did a dump of.
Okay, because I'll look
30
there.
Conferences.
Academia charges you, so I don't go there.
Yeah. So I did a dump a few days ago. They're all there.
Okay, great.
We'll see. Erica's got a question.
Hi there. So this is a follow-up question, just to make sure that I understand these geometric shapes that are superimposed on the different animals really are really intriguing. You've shown us three with three different animals. There are another like 5 or 6 other sets of these geometric box type shapes.
Yeah, there's 3 or 4 of them. They're in another chamber it's in the, I can't remember, but we actually have the predecessors of these shapes.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, but I mean, I'm let's just keep it to the same set of caves and the same types of geometric shapes. I'm sorry, I've got to turn that up.
Well, these are also in the same chamber, and the others are in a different chamber.
Okay. Does that so I'm just sort of looking to see whether these geometric shapes are always attached to animals and whether
they are. Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
but wait, hold on. So if you have a pregnant mare, do you always have that 3-2-1-Y shape?
No, because what you don't have many pregnant mares. You don't have, in fact, I don't know of any pregnant mares that have that shape. But we saw the other pregnant mare earlier on, that she has the 13 dots that lead to a box, and then she has another bunch that lead to the. So this is one artist.
So if this is going to be, if this is sort of a symbolic system, are there any repeats at all in the symbolism? Has the symbol ever been repeated with the same meaning twice?
I don't have these symbols with these geometric figures with these animals as such. And I believe the reason, I believe the reason is that because they didn't use, everybody else was using hand gestures.
Okay, so these are basically one-offs. Then there aren't any aurochs that have a similar geometric shape that looks like this, or another ibex that looks like this. This is just there's one mare and there's a box that looks like that. There's one ibex, there's a symbol that looks like that, and so forth.
It's oryx with the same 4 that have the 4. There's oryx with the 4, but you have oryx, and they actually they all touch the same grid, but they touch it different ways, and so I'm not going to make up something. But what we do, so what we do have is we have the before we had the black stag. Earlier on with the black stag, and the black stag had you have 13 dots leading to a box on the black stag. And then we had the major stag, which I had illustrated, which in the Griffith Observatory paper, which we have, again, you had 13 marks and you had a box. And on that same page, I had there was from here in the Columbia Basin, we have 13 marks on the back of an elk, and you have someone actually firing a bow, throwing an arrow.
Okay, so the 13 stuff is repeatable across.
Yes, that's very repeatable. Yeah,
but these guys are one-offs within the one.
These are one-offs.
Okay,
yeah. And these are probably based on the style of the art. They're probably the same artist. The same artist. There's other art in the same chamber that is stylistically different. Whereas these 3 are stylistically the same.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that these 3 in this chamber are useful because as proposed with the hand gestures, they may explain why the hand gestures are as they are. Now, I'm certainly not the first one to start counting fingers to say they're lunations. Many people have said that over time. But I'm putting the 2 together. There was a French anthropologist named André Leroy-Gourhan, and he took a different approach to this. What he did was he counted all the number of hand gestures and all the number of animals. And he said was that most of the number of the animals were horses, and most of the number of these hand stencils were therefore horses. But this was his horse, so I don't think so. Okay, there could be a lot of reasons for that. Okay, and he wasn't able to actually see fingers. It would be finger down, but he couldn't tell if it was forward or not in the technology. He did have he said that his ibex was this, and his count. So I'm going to blow up the horse was not. I believe that yes, this could have had something with the horse, and then the rest of it could be counted correctly. So he came up with this as the ibex, in his order of the number of animals depicted in the caves and the number of hand gestures he could see, and he came up with this for the bison. He came up with this for the bison, and I don't think he had the oryx. I don't think he had the oryx in his list. So there's he get 2 out of 3 is not bad. There was a song about that. But what Gorham did was actually brilliant. But I think that this one with the horse being the most prominent became problematic because it could be many other things. We see this all around the world, but in places where there are no horses. But yeah, he had the ibex, and this was his bison, which was the same as the Berthen oryx. So that's clever, but I don't use his example as evidence because this is the problem one. And he also didn't see, as I said, he knew he could say that this finger wasn't there, but he didn't know that the finger was leaning forwards. That's the difference. He didn't know it was leaning forwards. But he was brilliant.
What does the fact that it was leaning forward mean?
Yes.
I think the question was, what is the fact that it was leaning forward? What did that mean? What did that represent?
Actually, so the leaning forwards. They're I think they're actually, I actually did that. I had that in the, well, well, number one, it's descriptive. It's descriptive of the ears or the antlers of the animals. But I actually figured out the leaning forwards too, but I don't remember it offhand. And but they have extra fingers, so the pregnant mare is it doesn't need this one. You don't have 4 fingers. The ibex, you don't have 4 fingers, but you do have fingers. You need 4 fingers to pull this one off, to pull off the dropping of the young. But yeah, I worked out a syntax. It's possible why the top lean forward and the versus up like this or down like that. I just don't remember.
Well, Bernie, I want to thank you for a great talk. It was very interesting. I want to thank everybody for a great discussion. And I like the way that you pulled it back to red pink draw to home in on the rock art of the American Southwest and possible routes to some of the cognitive maps that are out there. If there's no other questions for Bernie, I guess we'll call it a night.
Very good.
All right. Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
And everybody have a great night. We hope to see you in February.
Sure enough.
That comes. Fair enough.
Good night.
Thanks all. See y'all
Thank you
later.
again. Thanks, Bernie.
Thank you, Chris, for organizing.
Thank you.